The Galactic Council had tried everything. They had sent their best negotiators, their most skilled mediators, and even their most feared enforcers. Nothing worked. The war between the Vorthan Empire and the Kelix Confederacy had raged for 200 years, and both sides seemed ready to fight for another 200 more. Ambassador Xerix of the Meloran Republic stood before the council chamber, his 4 eyes blinking in frustration. "We have exhausted all options," he said, his voice echoing through the massive hall. "The Vorthan will not stop until the Kelix are destroyed. The Kelix will not stop until the Vorthan are destroyed. There is no middle ground. There is no compromise. There is only death." The other council members shifted in their seats. They all knew what this meant. If the war continued, it would eventually spread. Other systems would be pulled in. Other species would be forced to choose sides. The galaxy could burn, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. The chamber was silent for a long moment. No one had any new ideas. No one had any hope. They had all watched this war tear through entire star systems, destroying planets, ending civilizations, and leaving nothing but ash and grief behind. "Perhaps," said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber, "you should let us try." Everyone turned to look at the speaker. She was a human, one of those strange beings from the Sol system. They had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and most species still did not know what to make of them. They were soft. They were small. They were weak. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities, and yet somehow they kept surviving. Somehow they kept finding ways to matter. Her name was Sarah Chen, and she was the Terran ambassador to the Galactic Council. She was a small woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She did not look like someone who could stop a war. She did not look like someone who could stop anything at all. "The humans," Xerix made a sound that might have been laughter. "No offense, Ambassador Chen, but what could your people possibly offer? You have no military strength to threaten them. You have no economic power to bribe them. You have nothing that either side wants." Sarah smiled. It was a warm smile, the kind that made people feel comfortable even when they did not want to feel comfortable. It was the kind of smile that made people want to trust her, even when they knew better. "You are right, Ambassador Xerix. We have nothing that they want, but we have something that they need." "And what is that?" "Empathy." The chamber went silent, not because the word was impressive, but because no one knew what it meant. The translators in their earpieces had converted the word directly, but the concept did not exist in most galactic languages. It was just a sound without meaning. "Empathy?" Xerix asked. "I am not familiar with this term. Is it a weapon, a technology, a resource?" "No," Sarah said, stepping forward so that the light from the chamber's central star fell on her face. "It is the ability to understand what another being feels, to see the universe through their eyes, to know their pain as if it were your own." Xerix blinked all 4 of his eyes in confusion. "That sounds useless. How can understanding someone's feelings stop them from shooting at you?" "It cannot stop them from shooting," Sarah admitted. "But it can make them not want to shoot in the first place. It can remind them that the being in their sights is a person, not a target. It can show them that their enemy's pain is just as real as their own." "That is not strategy," Xerix said. "That is philosophy, and philosophy has never won a war." "Perhaps not," Sarah said, "but it has ended many, and with your permission I would like to use it to end this one." The council debated for 3 hours. Most of them thought it was a waste of time. The humans were strange creatures with strange ideas. This empathy was probably just another word for weakness, but they had no other options, and letting the humans fail would cost them nothing. "Very well," Xerix said finally. "You may try, Ambassador Chen, but do not expect success. The Vorthan and Kelix hate each other more than any species has ever hated another. 200 years of war has created wounds that cannot be healed." Sarah nodded, her expression calm and determined. "We shall see." The Terran diplomatic ship was called the Hope. It was a small vessel, barely larger than a shuttle, with no weapons and minimal shields. It looked like an easy target, which was exactly the point. Sarah did not want to appear threatening. She wanted to appear harmless, because harmless beings were often allowed to go where dangerous ones could not. Her team consisted of 5 people, each chosen for their unique abilities. There was James, a former soldier who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the best. He had fought in 3 wars on Earth before becoming a diplomat, and he understood violence in a way that most diplomats did not. There was Maria, a psychologist who could read emotions like others read books. She could tell when someone was lying, when they were afraid, when they were hiding something even from themselves. There was Chen Wei, no relation to Sarah, who was an expert in alien cultures. He had spent 20 years studying the Vorthan and Kelix, and he knew more about their histories than most of their own people did. There was Ahmed, a linguist who could speak 12 languages and was learning 3 more. He understood that words were more than just sounds, that they carried meaning and history and emotion that could not be directly translated. And there was Dr. Elizabeth Park, an elderly woman who had spent her entire life studying conflict resolution. She had helped end civil wars on Earth, and she believed that the same principles could work anywhere. They were not warriors. They were not spies. They were not even particularly brave. They were just people who believed that understanding was stronger than hatred. "First stop, the Vorthan homeworld," Sarah announced as the ship entered hyperspace. "We need to understand them before we can help them." "The Vorthan are not exactly welcoming to outsiders," James said, his face troubled. "Their last response to a diplomatic mission was to shoot the ship down and display the wreckage as a warning." "They did not shoot us down when we requested permission to land," Sarah pointed out. "No, they just said they would kill us if we annoyed them." James shook his head. "I am not sure that is better." Sarah laughed. It was a genuine laugh full of warmth and confidence. "It is much better. It means they are willing to talk even if they do not know it yet. They could have refused us completely, but they did not. That tells me something." "It tells me they want to watch us fail up close," James said. "Perhaps, but even that is a kind of engagement, and engagement is all we need." The Vorthan homeworld was called Vorthan Prime, and it was a harsh place. The sky was a permanent shade of orange, colored by the dust that filled the atmosphere from ancient volcanic activity. The air smelled like sulfur and metal, and the wind was hot and dry. The cities were built like fortresses, with thick walls and heavy gates and defensive towers at every corner. Everything about the planet spoke of a people who had learned to fight for survival against a hostile universe. The Vorthan themselves were imposing creatures. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with thick scales that ranged from dark green to deep brown. Their tails were powerful, capable of knocking down walls, and their claws were sharp enough to tear through metal. Their eyes were small and cold, set deep in armored skulls, and their mouths were filled with rows of sharp teeth. They looked like predators, and they acted like predators. Everything about them was designed for combat. The Terran delegation was met at the landing pad by a Vorthan officer named Krath. He was larger than most of his kind, his scales covered with scars from countless battles. He looked at the 5 humans with obvious contempt, like a hunter looking at prey that was not worth the effort of killing. "You are the diplomats?" he asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "We are," Sarah said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You do not look like much." "We are not much," Sarah admitted. "We are just people who want to talk." Krath made a sound that might have been a snort. "Talk. The Meloran talked, the Silix talked, the Council talked and talked and talked. It changed nothing. Words are weak. Only strength matters." "Then perhaps we should not use words," Sarah said. "Perhaps we should use actions." "Actions?" Krath's eyes narrowed. "What kind of actions?" "We want to see the war," Sarah said. "Not from reports or recordings. We want to see it with our own eyes. We want to understand what your people are fighting for." Krath stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, A smile spread across his face. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who was about to show someone else something terrible. "You want to see the war," he said. "Very well, little human, I will show you the war. And when you see it, you will understand why there can never be peace." The transport ship took them to the front lines. Sarah sat by a window, watching the stars blur past as they traveled through hyperspace. The other members of her team were quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. They all knew they were heading toward danger, toward death, toward sights that might haunt them forever. But they also knew that this was necessary. They could not help people they did not understand. "Are you sure about this?" James asked quietly, sitting down next to Sarah. "The front lines of a 200-year war are not exactly safe." "Nothing worth doing is safe," Sarah said. "Besides, we need to understand. We cannot help them if we do not understand what they have been through. And if understanding them gets us killed." Sarah turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a deep sadness in them. "Then at least we will have tried. That is more than most people can say." The transport dropped out of hyperspace near a planet called Voxus III. Once, it had been a beautiful world, with blue oceans and green forests and cities that sparkled in the sunlight. Now it was a wasteland. The oceans had boiled away, leaving behind only salt flats that stretched to the horizon. The forests had burned, leaving only blackened stumps and ash. The surface was scarred with craters and trenches, the marks of 2 centuries of constant warfare. "This was a Kelix colony," Krath explained, his voice flat. 50 million people lived here before the war. Now there is nothing but death." "What happened to the colonists?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Krath's expression did not change. "They are gone." "Gone where?" "Just gone." Sarah looked at the ruined planet through the window. 50 million people. Gone. Not evacuated, not relocated. Gone. She felt a cold weight settle in her chest, but she did not look away. She forced herself to see every crater, every scar, every mark of destruction. This was what war looked like. This was what hatred created. "Show us more," she said. Krath seemed surprised by the request, but he nodded. "As you wish." Over the next 3 days, he showed them everything. He showed them the memorial walls where the names of the Vorthan dead were carved in stone, row after row after row, millions of names stretching into the distance until they became just a blur of marks too small to read. He showed them the hospitals where wounded soldiers screamed in pain, their bodies broken by Kelix weapons, their scales torn away, their limbs missing. He showed them the orphanages where children grew up without parents, their faces hard and their eyes empty, already being trained to fight the same war that had killed their families. And he showed them the hatred. It was everywhere, in every conversation, in every glance, in every breath. The Vorthan did not just dislike the Kelix. They hated them with a passion that burned like fire. They hated them for the war. They hated them for the death. They hated them for existing. "Now do you understand?" Krath asked on the 3rd day. "This is not a conflict that can be resolved with words. This is blood. This is honor. This is survival. We cannot stop fighting until they are destroyed or we are." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the beginning." "The beginning." "The beginning of the war. How did it start?" Krath's expression darkened. "You do not know." "I know what the history books say. I want to know what you say, what your people say, what you teach your children." Krath was silent for a while. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, sadder. "It was a border dispute," he said. "A single system rich in resources. Both sides claimed it. Both sides sent ships. There was a misunderstanding, someone fired, ships were destroyed, people died. And then we had to respond. We could not let their attack go unanswered, so we attacked back, and they responded, and we responded, and on for 200 years. Krath shook his head. "Now no one even remembers who fired first. All we know is that they must be destroyed." Sarah nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Commander. I have one more request. What is it? I want to meet someone who lost everything to this war. Not a soldier, not a politician, just a regular person. Someone who can tell me what this war has really cost your people. Krath studied her for a long moment. Then he said, I know someone. Her name was Vasha, and she was 90 years old. In Vorthan terms, that meant she was ancient, far older than most of her kind ever lived to be. She lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of the capital, surrounded by pictures of people who were no longer alive. The house was clean but empty, filled with memories that had nowhere else to go. My husband, she said, pointing to one picture. A strong Vorthan male in military dress, his scales shining with pride. Killed in the Battle of Nexus Prime. They told me he died a hero, as if that word means anything. My son, she said, pointing to another. A younger Vorthan barely out of childhood, killed in the siege of Korra Station. He was just a supply officer, he was not even a fighter, but a Kelix bomb did not care about that. My daughter, she said, pointing to a third. A female with gentle eyes holding what looked like a scientific instrument. Killed in the bombing of Vorthan IX. She was a researcher. She was trying to find ways to grow food in harsh environments. She wanted to help people, and they killed her anyway. My grandchildren, she said, pointing to 4 more pictures. 2 males, 2 females, all young, all smiling. All killed, all gone. I have outlived everyone I ever loved. Sarah sat across from her, her hands folded in her lap. The weight of all that loss pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. But she did not look away. She owed Vasha that much. I am so sorry, she said, and she meant it. The words came from somewhere deep inside her, a place where pain recognized pain. Vasha looked at her with old, tired eyes. Why are you here, human? What do you want from me? I want to understand, Sarah said. I want to understand what this war has cost you, what it has cost all of you. It has cost me everything, Vasha said. Everything I loved, everything I had. I have nothing left but memories, and even those bring me only pain. Do you hate the Kelix? Vasha was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I used to, she said. I used to hate them so much that it was all I could think about. Every day I would dream of their destruction. Every night I would pray for their suffering. I wanted them to feel what I felt. I wanted them to know what it was like to lose everything. And now I am just tired. Vasha closed her eyes. I have been hating for so long that I have forgotten what anything else feels like. I am tired of hating. I am tired of hurting. I am tired of being alive in a universe that has taken everything from me. Sarah reached out and took Vasha's hand. The old Vorthan flinched at the touch, her scales rough against Sarah's soft skin, but she did not pull away. What would you want? Sarah asked gently. If you could have anything in the universe. Vasha opened her eyes. There were tears in them, something Sarah had not expected to see in a Vorthan. She had not known they could cry. I would want it to stop, she whispered. I would want no more mothers to lose their children, no more wives to lose their husbands, no more families to be destroyed by this endless, pointless war. Even if that means the Kelix survive. Vasha was silent for a long moment. Her hand trembled in Sarah's grasp. Then slowly she nodded. Even then, she said, I am too tired to hate anymore. I just want it to end. Sarah squeezed her hand. Thank you, she said. Thank you for sharing your truth with me. It means more than you know. As they left Vasha's house, Krath walked beside Sarah in silence. Finally, he spoke. That was unexpected, he said. I have never heard a Vorthan speak like that before. We are taught to be strong, to fight, to never show weakness. Is wanting peace weakness? Sarah asked. Krath did not answer immediately. He seemed to be thinking about the question, really considering it for the first time. Commander, Sarah said, I would like to visit the Kelix next. Would you be willing to give us safe passage through the war zone? Krath looked at her for a long moment. Something had changed in his eyes. The contempt was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something that might have been curiosity, maybe even respect. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you want to visit our enemy?" "Because they are not just your enemy," Sarah said. "They are people too, and I cannot help end this war unless I understand both sides." Krath considered this, then slowly he nodded. "I will give you safe passage," he said. "But if you share our secrets with them, if you betray us in any way, I will hunt you down myself." Sarah smiled. "I would expect nothing less." The Kellick's homeworld was called Karath, and it was almost the opposite of the Vorthan world. Where Vorthan Prime was harsh and orange, Karath was soft and blue. The sky was the color of a gentle ocean, and the air smelled like flowers. The cities were built with graceful curves and open spaces, designed for beauty rather than defense. There were gardens everywhere, filled with plants that produced music when the wind blew through them. The Kellicks themselves were equally different from the Vorthan. They were smaller, barely taller than humans, with delicate features and large, expressive eyes. Their skin was covered in fine fur that ranged from silver to gold, and they moved with a grace that made them look like dancers. Everything about them spoke of a people who valued art and beauty over warfare. Sarah's team was met at the landing pad by a Kellick's official named Saris. She looked at the humans with suspicion, but not hostility. "You are the Terran Diplomats," she said. Her voice was musical, each word flowing into the next like notes in a song. "We were surprised when you requested permission to visit. No outsiders have come to Karath in decades." "We appreciate you allowing us to come," Sarah said. "We know it was not an easy decision." Saris nodded slowly. "The Council said you might be able to help end the war. I do not believe it, but I am willing to listen. What do you want from us?" "The same thing we wanted from the Vorthan," Sarah said. "We want to understand." Over the next 3 days, Saris showed them the Kellick side of the war. She showed them the memorial gardens where the names of the dead were written on floating crystals that caught the light and scattered it like tears. She showed them the healing centers where wounded soldiers lay in quiet rooms, their bodies wrapped in bandages, their eyes staring at nothing. She showed them the community homes where orphan children were raised by the whole community, because there were not enough parents left to care for them all. And she showed them the grief. It was different from the Vorthan hatred, but just as deep. The Kellicks did not rage against their enemy. They mourned. They wept. They carried their sorrow like a weight that would never be lifted. "We did not want this war," Saris said on the 3rd day. "We are not warriors. We are artists, philosophers, healers. But the Vorthan attacked us, and we had to defend ourselves. And now, 200 years later, we have become something we never wanted to be." "Tell me about the beginning," Sarah said. Saris sighed. "It was a border dispute, a single system. Both sides sent ships. There was a misunderstanding, someone fired." "Who fired first?" "We do not know. Our records say they did. Their records probably say we did. It does not matter anymore. All that matters is that it happened and we cannot undo it." "What would it take to end it?" Sarah asked. Saris looked at her with sad eyes. "I do not know. We have tried everything. We have offered peace, but they refuse. We have offered to return to the old borders, but they refuse. They will not stop until we are destroyed." "And if they would stop, if they were willing to talk?" Saris was quiet for a long moment. "Then perhaps there would be hope, but they will never stop. They hate us too much." "What if I told you that is not true?" Saris's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have spoken to the Vorthan. I have seen their pain. I have heard their grief. They are not monsters, Saris. They are people just like you. People who have lost everything to this war and are desperate for it to end." "That cannot be true," Saris said. "They are brutal, they are savage, they destroy everything they touch." "They say the same about you," Sarah said gently. "And you are neither brutal nor savage. Perhaps they are not either." Saris looked troubled. I do not know what to believe." Then let me show you, Sarah said. Let me arrange a meeting between you and someone from the Vorthan side. Not a politician, not a soldier, just a regular person. Someone who has lost as much as you have. That is impossible, Sarah said. The council would never allow it. The military would never allow it. Our people would never allow it. But would you allow it? If I could make it happen, would you come? Saras was silent for a long time. Then slowly she nodded. If you can arrange it, she said, I will come. Sarah smiled. Then I will arrange it. The meeting took place on a neutral station near the border between Vorthan and Kellic space. It was a small station, barely large enough to hold a few dozen people, with windows that looked out into the endless darkness of space. It had been abandoned years ago, but the Terran team had cleaned it up and made it presentable. They had even added some decorations, trying to make the space feel less cold and sterile. Sarah had worked for 2 weeks to make this happen. She had called in every favor, made every promise, pushed every boundary. The Vorthan had resisted. The Kellics had resisted. The council had called her insane, but in the end she had convinced them. Not to end the war, that was too much to ask, just to allow one meeting, one conversation, one chance for understanding. Vasha arrived first. The old Vorthan looked even more frail than before, her scales dull and her eyes tired. But there was something else in her expression now, something that might have been hope. Thank you for coming, Sarah said. Thank you for asking, Vasha replied. I did not think I would ever leave my house again, but what you said, it made me want to try one more time. Saras arrived a few minutes later along with a Kellic's elder named Koraz. He was old, even by Kellic standards, with silver fur that had faded to white. He moved slowly, leaning on a walking stick that had clearly been carved by hand. His eyes were clouded with age, but they were still sharp. Thank you for coming, Sarah said to them. Koraz looked at Vasha with obvious fear. The Vorthan was 3 times his size, with scales and claws and teeth. She looked like a predator. She looked dangerous. Vasha looked at Koraz with the same fear. The Kellics was small and delicate, with large eyes that seemed to see right through her. He looked alien. He looked wrong. He looked like the enemy she had hated for so long. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick and heavy, filled with 200 years of hatred and grief. Then Sarah said, I asked you both here because you have something in common. You have both lost everything to this war. I think you might have more to say to each other than you realize. Vasha and Koraz looked at each other. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with curiosity. I lost my entire family, Vasha said finally. Her voice was rough with emotion. My husband, my son, my daughter, my grandchildren, all gone. Koraz closed his eyes. I lost my family as well, my wife, my 3 children, my sister and her family, everyone I ever loved. I used to hate your people, Vasha said. I used to dream of your destruction, every day, every night. I used to fear your people, Koraz said. I used to have nightmares about your ships coming to burn our worlds. I would wake up screaming. And now, Sarah asked softly. They looked at each other, and something passed between them. Something that transcended language, that transcended species, that transcended 200 years of war. Now I see someone who has suffered as much as I have, Vasha said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Now I see someone who understands my pain, Koraz said. And then slowly, Koraz reached out his hand. His fur-covered fingers trembled in the air, extended toward the massive Vorthan. Vasha looked at the hand for a long moment. Then she reached out her own scaled hand and took it. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She did not try to stop them. This, she said softly, is empathy. This is understanding that someone else's pain is just as real as your own. This is the first step toward peace. The news of the meeting spread through both empires like wildfire. Some called it a betrayal. Some called it a trick. Some called it the beginning of the end. But others called it hope. Within a month, more meetings were arranged, not between politicians or generals, but between ordinary people, people who had lost families, people who had lost friends, people who had lost everything. And at each meeting, the same thing happened. Fear turned to curiosity. Curiosity turned to understanding. Understanding turned to something that looked almost like friendship. The war did not end overnight. 200 years of hatred could not be erased in weeks or months. There were setbacks, conflicts, moments when it seemed like everything would fall apart. But it did not fall apart, because now there were people on both sides who had looked into the eyes of their enemy and seen themselves reflected back. 1 year after the first meeting, a formal peace treaty was signed. It was not a perfect treaty. There were compromises and concessions that left both sides unhappy, but it was peace. Real peace for the first time in 200 years. The Galactic Council was stunned. They had tried everything, used every tool at their disposal, and nothing had worked. And then the humans had come with their strange concept of empathy and achieved what no one else could. Ambassador Xerix called Sarah before the council to explain what had happened. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you end a war that everyone said was unwinnable?" Sarah smiled. It was the same warm smile she had given on the first day, when no one believed in her. "I did not end the war," she said. "They ended it themselves. All I did was help them see each other as people. Once they did that, they did not want to fight anymore." "But how?" Xerix pressed. "How did you make them see each other differently?" "By listening," Sarah said. "By caring. By understanding that their pain was real and their grief was valid. By treating them not as enemies to be defeated, but as people to be helped. By showing them that the beings they hated were not monsters. They were just people who had suffered just like them." "That is not a strategy," Xerix said. "That is not a tactic, that is just feeling." "Yes," Sarah said, "that is exactly what it is, and it is the most powerful weapon in the universe." 3 years after the peace treaty, the Vorthan Empire and the Kelix Confederacy announced a formal alliance. Not just peace, but partnership. They would work together, trade together, explore together. The two species that had spent 200 years trying to destroy each other would now build a future together. Vasha and Cora stood at the signing ceremony, their hands clasped together, their eyes bright with tears. They had become friends in the years since their first meeting. More than friends, family. "I never thought this day would come," Vasha said. "I never thought I would see peace in my lifetime." "Neither did I," Cora said. "But here we are, because a small human woman believed that we could be better than our hatred." Sarah stood in the crowd, watching the ceremony with a smile on her face. Her team stood beside her, all of them crying, all of them proud. "Do you think it will last?" James asked. "I do not know," Sarah admitted. "Peace is not a destination. It is a journey. There will be challenges, setbacks, moments when it seems like the old hatred is coming back. But as long as there are people who remember what we taught them, there is hope." "And what did we teach them?" Maria asked. Sarah turned to look at her team. These ordinary people who had done an extraordinary thing. "We taught them empathy," she said. "We taught them that their enemies were people too. We taught them that understanding is stronger than hatred, that connection is stronger than conflict, that love is stronger than war." "That is a lot to learn," Ahmed said. "It is," Sarah agreed. "But they learned it, and now they will teach it to their children, and their children will teach it to their children. And one day, the galaxy will be full of people who know that there is always another way." The ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse. But before Sarah could leave, Commander Krath approached her. The massive Vorthan looked different now. The hardness was still there, but it was softer somehow, tempered by something that had not been there before. "Ambassador Chen," he said. "Commander Krath." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I did not believe you. When you first came to our world, I thought you were weak and foolish. I thought your empathy was just another word for surrender." "And now?" Sarah asked. Krath looked at the ceremony hall, where Vorthan and Kelix were mingling together, talking, laughing, sharing stories. It was a sight that would have been impossible just a few years ago, a sight that no one had believed could ever happen. "Now I understand," he said. "Empathy is not weakness, it is strength. The strength to see beyond your own pain, the strength to understand your enemy, the strength to choose peace when war would be easier." He looked back at Sarah, and there was respect in his eyes. Real respect, the kind that is earned, not given. "Thank you," he said, "for showing us another way." Sarah smiled. "Thank you for being willing to learn. That took more courage than any battle." Krath nodded, then walked away to join the celebration. Sarah turned and walked toward the exit, her team beside her. There were other conflicts in the galaxy, other wars, other hatreds, and the Terran Diplomats would be there, ready to help, ready to listen, ready to teach empathy to anyone willing to learn. Because that was what humans did. They were not the strongest species or the smartest or the most advanced. They did not have natural weapons or armor or special abilities, but they had something that no one else seemed to have: the ability to feel another being's pain, the ability to understand another being's fear, the ability to love even when love was hard. And in a galaxy full of wars and hatred, that made them the most powerful species of all. As she boarded her ship, Sarah received a message from the Galactic Council. There was another conflict far away on the other side of the galaxy. Two species fighting over resources, their hatred growing every day. The Council wanted to know if she would help. Sarah smiled and began to compose her response. "Dear Council," she wrote, "yes, we will help, we will always help, that is what we do." Because empathy was not just a tool, it was not just a strategy, it was not just a way to win. It was what made humans human. And it was a gift they were happy to share with the galaxy. Xerix watched the human ship depart through the viewscreen in his office. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he processed everything he had witnessed over the past few years. He still did not fully understand empathy. It was such a strange concept, so different from everything he had been taught about power and strength. But he had seen what it could do. He had seen it turn enemies into friends. He had seen it end a war that everyone said was endless. He had seen it create an alliance from hatred. And for the first time in his long life, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the galaxy had something to learn from those strange, soft, fragile little humans. Perhaps empathy was not weakness after all. Perhaps it was the greatest strength of all. He turned away from the viewscreen and walked to his desk. There was work to be done, reports to write, messages to send, a galaxy to help govern. But first he made a note to himself, a reminder for later. "Learn more about empathy," it said. "Ask the humans to teach me." Because if there was one thing Xerix had learned from all of this, it was that it was never too late to learn something new. Even for an old Meloran who had thought he knew everything. Even for a galaxy that had thought war was the only answer. There was always another way. You just had to be willing to look for it.